Hello and welcome to Dialogue. The Davos Agenda Summit takes place this year against the backdrop of a crisis that has ruined livelihoods and widened inequalities around the world. Well, this year's event aims to promote a robust green recovery for the world post-pandemic. After such a difficult year, will heads of state rise to the need for global cooperation? What economic, social, and environmental challenges does the globe face because of the pandemic? And what can China do? To talk about these issues and more, I'm joined by Professor Jeffrey Towson, host of Jeff's Asia Tech class, Mr. Liu Zhixin, Senior Fellow of the Chongyang Institute for Financial Studies at Renmin University of China, and David Eichmann, Chief Representative Officer in China of the World Economic Forum. That's our topic. I'm Zhou Yue. Let me start with you, Mr. Liu. Like other world leaders, President Xi is attending this year's summit via video link. The last time he attended the Davos Forum 4 years ago, he sounded optimistic about the world economy, but this is before COVID and before China-US trade war. So what is his main message this year, Mr. Liu?
I believe that the message he sent this today and yesterday in his speech is very important to the whole world. And also Xi Jinping was the first state leader in the world to make such a speech during this summit this year. This is a very important event, not only for China, but also for the whole world. As we know, 4 years ago, Xi Jinping also attended Davos and made a speech. At that time, he reiterated the importance of globalization and also suggests to build up the shared future for human beings. Now this year that something changed, especially for the pandemic outbreak. It's also a sudden attack to all over the world. So under such circumstances, in his speech, he emphasizes the importance of cooperation all over the world to work together to fight virus outbreak, and also to strengthen all the efforts that to make the economic recovery. And the third is to eliminate the differences of all over the countries, especially in political ideas, and to have to unite together, to have a unified strength against the pandemic outbreak, and also to maintain the world economy recovery. So what China should do and what China can do, he also tells the whole world that China is ready to cooperate, to coordinate, to support the whole world efforts to fight pandemic and also to fight for the economic recovery.
And David, how is this message of unity and joint efforts being received by probably the audiences in Davos?
Well, I think the message was absolutely on point because, you know, the whole theme of this week is around rebuilding trust in this critical year. Because all of the leaders are reaching out to us and saying, this is the key. You know, global challenges cannot be solved any other way except through global cooperation. And to do that, you need trust, you need dialogue. And so, you know, this week is critically important step in that. And, you know, getting the leaders on the same page around the issues, and then trying to see how we can foster those partnerships to actually get concrete action. So I think it was a great kickoff to the week to really focus people's minds on the difficult challenge ahead.
And Jeffrey, what do you make of the reasons the trust is lacking probably around the world? Is it because of the pandemic or other economic factors at play as well?
Well, I think that the trust issue has been, you know, over the last 4 years, it's been a major issue. Trust in trade, trust in technology, trust in media and information, all these things that we've been dealing with. I'm not sure how you get that part back or resolve it. But outside of those issues, we have coronavirus. And that seems to be the area where people are getting along and do trust each other. It is kind of the exception to the baseline that we've been dealing with over the last couple of years. So the idea of cooperation in vaccines and tracking and data, that seems very likely to happen. Is that going to extend to technology and Huawei and trade? Well, I wouldn't hold my breath on that, but you never know.
Okay, let's talk about the trust issue in that area that is between China and the U.S. Back in 2017, President Xi warned that a trade war would hurt the U.S. and China and the world at large. Well, it seems it has proven him right over the past 4 years. So, Mr. Liu, do you think his tone this time around will set the new agenda for relations between China and the U.S.? What will Biden think?
I think the new government in the White House will reconsider whether the strategy from the former administration is right or wrong. Because even 4 years ago, we have already stressed again and again that the importance of our cooperation between the two super economics, China and the United States. We should trust each other and cooperate each other. This is to the benefits of both countries and both nations. But the former administration in the White House tried to contain, tried to suppress China's development. That's the reason now they launched the so-called trade war. Not only for the trade deficit, this is not an excuse, but the excuse is try to stop the China's from its development road and direction. So this is the key point that why both sides need further discussion and dialogue to narrow the gap of understanding on each other, especially for Biden administration. I think they will try to consider to compare the result and achievement they had got in the past 4 years, what they have had from the trade war with China. They have heavy loss, and also the unemployment, even the enterprises, also the high technologies companies in the United States also suffered a lot from such policies. So in this way, we should set up a new policy and trust level that between the two sides. We should have a better understandings on each other's the core interests to have more respect, not misunderstanding. In this way, if we will have continue our misunderstanding, I think the United States will continue its misconduct against China. The political bias against China is very, very serious and also damage the United States itself. So this is very clear to the whole world. So we should emphasize and tell the United States and the Biden administration what's the right way to follow up.
Okay, let's take a listen. What exactly did Chinese president say about why we shouldn't go to a Cold War mentality? Take a listen.
To build small circles or start a new Cold War, to reject, threaten, or intimidate others, to willfully impose decoupling, supply disruption, or sanctions, and to create isolation or estrangement will only push the world into division and even confrontation.
So, Jeffrey, do you think the Biden administration will do the same as, quote, reject, threaten, and intimidate others?
Well, I think if you go back before President Trump, I mean, President Trump was absolutely pivotal. You know, the relationship between China and the U.S. before Trump was dramatically different. This is a sea change. But I also wouldn't necessarily point to him as the reason. I think it was probably a necessary, at least, reconsideration of the relationship. And he just happened to be kind of a loud voice within that. But it was happening anyways. And that wasn't just a U.S. thing. We see the same thing out of India. We see the same thing out of the EU, Great Britain. So look, the world is sort of resetting itself right now. Trump was a bit of a loud voice within that. I think, you know, that voice is gone now, but I think the discussion is going to continue. And we've already heard the first sort of indications out of the Biden administration that they're going to start working on things like trade. They're going to start looking at things like technology and these areas, probably with a more multilateral approach. But the question is, what does multilateral mean? It doesn't mean every country. So that'll be kind of the big question is, what does that include and what does it not include?
David, what do you think? Because obviously, President Xi is warning Americans that a divide in economy, in trade, in technology will lead not necessarily just confrontation, but also division and war. Does that sound hollow to some people in America?
Well, I think the key is that we need China and the U.S. Working together on the global challenges. I mean, I know there are a lot of challenges around trade, around technology. These are maybe some of the more difficult issues to deal with. But if you take stuff like the pandemic, if you look at climate change, where we're frankly very heartened to see the United States come back into the Paris Agreement, these are areas where you can create dialogue and you can create trust and you can create collaboration, and those can be building blocks to work through some of the bigger issues. And I think President Xi said as much in his speech about recognizing we have those differences, maybe putting those on the shelf, and then really focusing on the areas of common interest. And the reality is that extreme weather events and climate change and pandemics don't really care about national borders and politics. So we really need the world's two largest economies working together on those and leading the world out of that.
And of course, Jeffrey, Biden is probably pretty occupied now by domestic politics and issues. When do you think he will sound clearer messages to China about how he will deal with it?
Right. I think that's kind of the interesting question for right now. It's not that if he's going to address it or not, but how high of a priority is this for him? I mean, clearly for Trump, this was a top issue. I mean, is Biden going to address this month, or is this going to be something that's number 10 on his list and we won't hear about it for months? I mean, I think that's kind of the question, is how much of a priority is the China-U.S. situation for this administration?
Can he afford to be inactive? Because trade issue, technology issues, those are very important issues.
Yeah, I think, to some degree, every administration gets to set their priorities, and to some degree, it's set by the world, and they have to respond. Certainly, let's say, within the trade dispute, if you look at the agricultural issues in the U.S. as a result of tariffs, that's a real immediate issue that has domestic political considerations. So I think that's one he's not going to ignore, and I don't think he can ignore. Other issues like, let's say, TikTok. Do I think he's going to open up the whole TikTok discussion? No. I don't think that's on the short list.
Mr. Liu, people are debating the ball is in which side's court. Do you think China probably should take some initiative to at least test the water, what kind of a China policy Biden will launch?
I mean, for China, I think we have many opportunities and possibilities to do the new policies, especially for also environmental protection and also in trade cooperation with the United States and the rest of the world. As we know, the Biden administration has enough time to consider its priorities, whether the vaccine distribution or even the virus control, I think, and also to rebuild the relations with the old alliance. And also then I think the fourth priority with the relations with China, how to coordinate and cooperate with China. I think it's some special and to some concerned areas that he will try to deepen the relations with China, because as we know that he personally has a very good relations and contact with Mr. Xi Jinping before. He had a better understanding. We hope that this can help him that make a good and clever decision and approach to deal with the China's government, especially in the fight against the virus outbreak. And also China can do a lot to help the United States to get rid of the risk. So this is a point that the Biden administration should follow up and should know it. Of course, for China, the environmental protection, the carbonization is also one major factor for China. We have already promised to do our utmost to fulfill our mission. This is the only country that have such a clear mission, also in advancing the time limit from the United Nations.
And another topic is, of course, approach to global affairs, Mr. Liu. I remember 4 years ago, President Xi has been singing the tune of multilateralism, which is music in the ears of many people attending the Davos Forum. But is it still the case now, multilateralism?
I believe that multilateralism is very important for all over the world. All the countries are trying to say in the same tune, in the same word, but whether the meaning behind it is different. For some countries, even for some, including the United States and its major alliance, they try to say the multilateralism that is a small clique or small circle that only with a few countries, where say it's a few English-speaking countries, for instance, they coordinate together, combine together to build up its own interest group to deal with the so-called globalization. This is not the real globalization, not the real multilateralism. So we need a real one that not only in science or in performance scene, like a drama in the stage. So we need, in reality, that to cooperate together. The multilateralism is something that we need to cooperate politically, economically, in culture, and in technology cooperation in all fields, not only in one field or in one project or in one sector. This is wrong.
I would ask the same question to you, Jeffrey, because President Biden also reiterated the U.S. will return to multilateralism and international cooperation. But in the minds of many Chinese, that seems to divide China with Europe and isolate China from the rest of the world.
Yeah, the multilateralism thing, trade people, economists, which I am not, I mean, they talk about this with various agreements and things. Those of us in the digital world, we use the word standards and protocols and connectivity. We want data in China to be of the same protocol type in Japan, Australia, the US, so all of that flows freely. In our world, that stuff is incredibly important. We want digital China, Alibaba, all these companies, to be able to do things across Asia as easily as in China, which is absolutely what's happening. So
but it's
on our side of
difficult.
The equation, things are actually quite good. Not really. It tends to happen pretty easily. When it gets down to the telecommunications layer, like Huawei, then things get a little bit more sensitive. But at the app layer and the data layer, things are actually connecting quite nicely right now. And where I am in Bangkok, every day things are getting more connected between Thailand, Cambodia, China, all of this.
But
so
is
it is actually,
but is it also the case
between
between Asia and
people.
Europe and North America? Because digital autonomy and digital independence is now considered liability rather than asset.
I think that's the minority case at best. I think most of the world is becoming, on the digital side, not trade, not all of that. On the digital side, things are becoming far more connected at a fairly rapid pace, with some notable carve-outs in the area of security, privacy, data localization. But overall, the trend line's going way up to the right now, and China is absolutely key in that story in Asia and beyond. Absolutely.
And David, do you worry about the world really decoupled? Because that means a very costly world. We are running a two parallel universes of technology and standards, and everybody has to choose sides.
I honestly, I don't see that happening for the reasons that Jeffrey is describing. It is that the world is getting more and more interconnected at a faster and faster rate. Because of the technology, and we're seeing this in so many different domains, and in that way it feels like globalization is almost somehow irreversible, and the world is much more interconnected and much more interdependent than ever, and you can see that in the last year. Look at how we realized how interconnected our economies were, how different industries and different sectors were so closely linked that you could see a complete, global slowdown because of the pandemic. And so I think therein also lies the hope for the future, that we can get things restarted, we can get things back on track, because that desire to connect and that business imperative to connect far outweighs the voices for decoupling and isolation.
And David, I also want to talk about the global economic recovery. The WEF founder Klaus Schwab said that the world needs an economic recovery, more resilient, more inclusive, more sustainable. But it seems that the only major economy in the world that is growing in 2020 is China, and the rest of the world is still trapped in the COVID response. So how can we achieve sustainable, resilient recovery?
Well, I think China offers an interesting example. If you look over the last year, China's recovery in part has been driven by two things. One is openness and the other one is sustainability. So despite the terrible pandemic and having to, restrict travel and so on, China continued its reform and opening up, opened more sectors for foreign direct investment, entered into the comprehensive RCEP, Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership with ASEAN, entered into the trade agreement with the EU. And so, China recognizes that openness is absolutely fundamental to that economic recovery. At the same time, with those carbon neutrality commitments and so on, China's sending a strong signal that the economy has to become much more sustainable. And so I think that long-term trend that China's been on towards moving away, from manufacturing towards services, moving to higher end manufacturing, all those things reflect a long trend line that China's on. And I think, other countries can look to that and be inspired by that. At the same time, China's been, eliminating extreme poverty, working to connect the country digitally, and so on. And so I think all those steps and indicators the rest of the world should really pay attention, because we are seeing in other countries with the pandemic that things like the digital divide and people having access to healthcare and the social safety net and so on, these are fractured and damaged within countries and within regions around the world. So I think it's time, and Davos Agenda Week is a great moment for people to take that step back and look around the world and see what's working, what's not working, compare notes, and then try and adjust strategies accordingly.
And Mr. Liu, a good barometer of that is probably China has overtaken the United States, become the destination of foreign direct investment, #1 in the world. But the problem is, can China continue stabilizer and the driving force for global growth, as we are also about to revamp our economy and change the role of state-owned economy, those kind of stuff?
Actually, China has been always as the world economic stabilizer and the driving force since 2009, when the financial crisis happened in the United States. China always has played such a role in the world economy. We try to stabilize the world economy situation. Also, we try to have coordination and cooperation with all parties in the world. That's why we have to say that China is always the booster or propeller for economic in the world. So China also has its own challenges to deal with, but we still overcome all our difficulties by ourselves. We don't need to cost many efforts from outside to overcome our domestic economic problems, but we have to do our best to take over all these responsibilities to recover in China, but also to help the whole world in a short term to make the economic to be improved. So in this way we can see that China's forecast for this year is quite positive, because this is based on the good reason that in last year in the difficulties that China has already achieved a positive result. So this year I think we can emancipate all the powers that are hidden and suppressed, and we'll have a better and a positive result this year.
Apart from economy, there is another concern, that's climate. From decarbonizing supply chains to delivering green carbon markets, sweeping lockdowns actually caused emissions to drop, but that is on the back of COVID control. So will economic recovery mean the easing of restrictions and the coming back of emissions, Jeffrey?
Yeah, I mean, at this point, I think everyone just wants an economic recovery and is probably not going to be too picky about what type it is or if it's green or sustainable or
and
not.
that's a worrying thing.
Any recovery will do right now. Now, in terms
Can
of
we do both,
the climate
walk
issue,
and chew the gum at the same time?
I don't know. That's, I guess, a good question. I think certain countries clearly can. I mean, one of the fascinating things about this year is, sometimes it's just about how good is the team. Certain countries, let's say Singapore, South Korea, have managed this very, very well, and other countries haven't. So I think certain countries definitely can do this, and I think certain countries I wouldn't necessarily think they can based on the last 6 months. So possibly, I think Asia has really, operated quite well in the last 6 months in responding to something that was really unprecedented. I mean, this was the first for most every government to deal with. And, Singapore was particularly good, Japan was good, China was good, South Korea was good. I mean, Asia has a lot to sort of pat themselves on the back, as much as you should at this time, over the last 6 months.
And David, Europe is promising green recovery. China is also saying going green, and Biden will probably also going a more greener development. But have you seen signs of change of gears towards a more carbon neutral economy?
Absolutely. I mean, we just released our new Nature Economy report, and in it we estimated that if we focus on a green recovery, we could have, create 395 million new jobs and over 10 trillion in GDP by focusing on this kind of nature-based business, nature-based solutions, whether that's in oceans health and the blue economy, whether that's in preserving tropical rainforests and so on. And so there's tremendous opportunity. And I think we want the world to focus on that. And we see the companies are moving in that direction. So we started out with a net zero challenge, trying to get some of our companies in the World Economic Forum to move to carbon neutrality. We started with about 70 at last year's annual meeting when we were all physically in Davos. And during the course of last year, that group grew to over 400. And so there really is a strong move here, because what you're seeing also with some of the ESG work we're doing is that those companies that are moving in that direction are increasing investment. They're doing well, and those kind of companies are the ones that have been the most resilient during this last year. So people are really starting to see the correlation between that long-term mindset and that sustainable business mindset and the resilience and performance of the company.
And Mr. Liu, John Kerry, they call him the American climate czar. He is expected to make a statement at the summit. And somebody say that climate issue will probably be the important, if not the only issue China and America can work with each other. What forms can they cooperate?
I mean, in many ways that China and the United States, even with other countries, can cooperate to fight the environmental challenges, because the environmental challenges is the so-called warming up of the Earth temperature. Also to have also the limitation of the production that to have polluted Earth, to polluted air and polluted water. In all these fields that China has a lot of things that to learn from the Western countries, especially from technologies from the United States. In this way, we can have many cooperations with the European countries and also with the United States. But of course, they should have a equal attitude to Chinese companies. That's why we need the cooperation and the inclusiveness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Liu. Thank you, David, and thank you, Jeffrey. You've been watching Dialogue here on CGTN. I'm Joe in Beijing. Thanks so much for watching. Bye.